So now here we are. Doctor is in number 10. And this has been really great. It's a privilege to have my friend and colleague, Shannon, the director of Liebe, ohne, Zwang, or Love Without Coercion. And she's going to talk to us today about the prevention of sex trafficking and Loverboy method and how to talk to teens about this difficult topic. So why don't I start with a question? Just tell us about how you got started. What was the impetus or trigger that led you to start in this work?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Catherine. I'm happy to be on The Doctor is In. And I've been working with people affected by human trafficking since 1996. So I started out just volunteering with a street outreach in Washington, D.C. while I was at university there. And most of the young women and girls that we were helping there had been trafficked for sexual exploitation, although at that time, we weren't calling it that. It was just sort of the normal way, just how prostitution is. But obviously looking back on it now, it was very obviously a trafficking situation, and even this Loverboy method that we're going to be talking about later. Yeah, and after I then later got my master's in public affairs, I came back to Germany and I wanted to be active against human trafficking here. And so now I'm the executive director and one of the founders of the Network Against Human Trafficking in Germany, which is das Netzwerk gegen Menschenhandel in German. Yes, and one of our projects is this Love Without Coercion, which we'll talk about later. So, and that was, our organization was founded in 2006. And we originally, well, we did sort of a needs assessment before we started. And we found out that there already are a lot of really great organizations in Germany working on this topic, especially offering services for survivors and also aftercare. So we knew that that was not the direction that we would go into. And we also noticed that there were very few organizations, if any, doing prevention work. And so really approaching the whole problem from the different end of the timeline, that there wasn't much happening there. And since we were all really interested in these sort of root causes of trafficking, why it happens in the first place, we thought, let's focus on that, how to prevent someone from actually being trafficked in the first place.
So what was the particular need or the niche that led you to start really working in this population, and particularly with the sex trafficking and in this particular age group?
Yeah, well, first of all, like I said, we noticed there was a definite need for prevention because there was literally almost nothing happening. I mean, a lot of these organizations that we were familiar with, some of them were doing some prevention, you know, being in schools once in a while or giving talks here and there, but it wasn't really their bread and butter. It wasn't what they were focusing on. So we decided to offer primary and secondary prevention measures. And I just want to talk maybe just shortly about the secondary prevention measures that we offer first, because we'll be spending most of our time on primary prevention. So basically in our secondary prevention, we are looking to train professionals that are likely to have contacts with victims of trafficking or potential victims of trafficking. And so we train them on, you know, the signs to look out for, how to respond if they do suspect someone may be trafficked, and then really important, what help and resources are available in the area that they are working in, especially survivor services and aftercare. And so we've trained pilots and flight attendants, we've trained law enforcement, social workers, teachers, and youth and religious leaders also. And in the future, we're also looking to expand that. We'd like to add more professional groups in transportation and hospitality. And yeah, and with Dr. Catherine, we're hoping to even get into healthcare professionals and helping there. So yeah, that's exciting. But primary prevention is our main focus. So, you know, how can we prevent as many young people as possible from becoming victims of human trafficking in Germany? And sort of the impetus for this, or what really got us into this, is that, you know, most people in Germany don't even realize that German nationals make up a large percentage of victims of trafficking in their own country. So I think they're most years for actual cases found by the police, they're the third largest national group. And the largest percentage of minors that are trafficked are German nationals. So In order to reach these German youth, we developed a curriculum that we use in German schools, and we've been using that since 2013. And there we're focusing mainly on the so-called Loverboy method of recruitment into prostitution, because that's what affects, I would say, most of the Germans trafficked for purposes of sexual exploitation, especially minors.
Great. So what, can you expound a little bit on Loverboys? I think a lot of people will recognize the method and what you mean by it, but the term Loverboy is something that we're using more often in Europe, not necessarily in other parts, but I think the method will be familiar to most people.
Yeah, so this method may have a different name in your country, wherever you're listening from. So I know in the US, for example, they will refer to these people as Romeo pimps or Romeo traffickers, or people might use the term grooming for prostitution, but they're all talking about the same thing. And one thing that's important, I think, before I get into how Loverboys operate, I just wanted to say that, you know, in most cases of trafficking for sexual exploitation, it's not happening like in the movies or like in conspiracy theories like QAnon or, you know, trying to have you believe. So we're not talking about victims that are getting snatched off streets and kidnapped and then forced into sexual slavery. And why is that? Because, you know, kidnapping people is a really bad business model for traffickers, basically. So, you know, you're kidnapping someone, you don't know who they are, you don't know who's going to be looking for them, and people are going to be looking for them. So that's just stress that a trafficker doesn't need. And so that's why traffickers are going to tend to build a relationship with their victims. And they're usually going to be people that they know, or at least a friend of a friend. And in Germany, you know, we see this case very, very often, especially in women trafficked from, you know, Eastern Europe. You know, it's a lot of times a family member also, or a friend or a cousin. And with Germans as well, it's a lot of time going to be their boyfriend or whatever. We also see the case, again, a lot with the Eastern European women, that they even knew beforehand that they were going to be working in prostitution, but which is totally legal in Germany, by the way. But they didn't know under which circumstances.
Yes.
You know, they didn't know that they would be working, that they wouldn't get to decide on their clients, what practices they do. They wouldn't get to keep their money. And then obviously this becomes a case of trafficking, right? So they're not being kidnapped and forced into it, but it's these other ways.
Yes.
So, but we want to talk about how Loverboys do it. How does the Loverboy recruit people into human trafficking? And I think a lot of this information will be familiar to some of you, but I'm hoping that there might be some things that you don't know, or some new tactics that you learn about. So a Loverboy is usually a young man, like late teens to early 30s, who is going to fake a romantic relationship with usually a young woman or a girl, with the goal of manipulating her into prostitution later. So this is all planned out from the beginning. This is the only reason he is interested in her. And I think according to latest statistics I read, about 20% of trafficking victims in Germany, again, these are cases that have been found out by the police, 20% of them are recruited using this Loverboy method. And I think it's probably even higher. It could be a discrepancy on, you know, are they counting it as, excuse me, you know, fraud, or is it the Loverboy method directly? So there's a gray area there. But the Loverboy is looking for a very specific type of girl, and will use a very specific strategy to get her to then turn tricks for him or to prostitute herself. So what type of girl is he looking for? And, you know, this could be different also depending on which country that you come from. But here it's, you know, going to be a girl that is going through some sort of difficulty in her life. And because of this, she may have low self-esteem, or be craving sort of a sense of belonging or affection, maybe even from a sort of protector figure. And this difficulty in her life that I'm talking about, it could be any number of things. It could be that her you know, parents have recently divorced, or that she's being bullied in school, that she's just moved to a new place, doesn't know anybody, or that she, you know, has even just sort of normal friction that parents have with their teens, you know, in these teen years. That could all be a source of difficulty. And this is often the reason that a trafficker will target teenagers, right? Excuse me. I'm getting over a cold, so you have to bear with me.
It's completely okay. Take your time. It's okay.
Yeah, so a trafficker or a lover boy is likely to target a teenager because, teenagers are looking to distance themselves from their parents. They may be going through a bit of a rebellious phase. They may be feeling misunderstood. They're discovering their sexuality for the first time. And these are all feelings that a lover boy can really prey on and exploit to his advantage. And so in Germany, and this may be different from other countries, we see girls targeted really from all walks of life, from all socioeconomic backgrounds, all races, all religions. But what they all have in common is some kind of this life difficulty I was talking about, and low feelings of low self-esteem or low self-worth. Yeah. So that's what we are seeing here. I know in other countries, it's very common, or it's kind of exclusively that runaways are affected, or children growing up in the foster care system. But in Germany, it is a bit broader.
So. But then again, the girls in those demographics are having the life difficulties too.
Definitely. So they're definitely at risk in Germany as well. I'm just saying we also need to look broader and not just focus on those groups. Because
for sure.
Yeah. And Loverboys, they're finding their victims basically anywhere where young people can hang out. But obviously recruitment is happening more and more online, on different social media platforms, on dating apps.
Yeah.
And this is interesting. Sometimes, we're seeing now Loverboys starting to target older women as well, and single mothers who may be having, for example, addiction problems. So they might enroll in like a recovery program to meet and recruit these women, or they may target women that are already in prostitution. And try to get them to work for them. So
yeah, but that's an important point to not for the other countries that think of, oh, well, we've got these particular groups of girls with these known risk factors in foster care or runaways or something like that, and then they can have blinders on as to who is actually more at risk.
And I guess what's important also about this method is once contact is made, that's when the lover boy really is going to be turning it on, because his main priority is to get this girl to fall in love with him quickly and to become her number one priority, and psychologically dependent on him. So he wants to become the center of her universe so that he can prevent any other voices of reason from influencing her, like parents or other family and friends. And so he'll, shower her with time and extravagant gifts and attention, and he'll always be there to listen to her problems and, always take her side if she's in any kind of argument, and really stoke any resentments that might be brewing between her and her parents or her and her friends. And he'll be taking her out on nice dates and, drive her to school and pick her up after school. And this is all in an attempt to really completely control her environment. And, he wants also to start a sexual relationship with her very, very quickly. And if he's her first boyfriend, or if she's even a virgin, this is even better for him, because she really doesn't have any experience with how adult relationships are working. And he can make her believe that anything he's trying to get her do later is normal, and begin grooming her sexually for prostitution. So he's going to try to really override any natural sexual inhibitions that she may have to protect herself, rightly so.
Yeah. By
saying, for example, that, she's just being a prude, or, she can't be sexually free until she's done X, Y.
Yeah.
And, he may introduce her to porn or something if she hasn't already been exposed. And just convince her that this is how sex is, this is how sex should be.
Yeah.
And being that first sexual contact for her is really another thing that cements that bond that they have with each other. And the lover boy knows this. He knows that first sexual experience for, this girl is very important. And so he's going to use that. And when the whole lover boy method is revealed and comes crashing down is when at some point, a crisis is fabricated, a financial crisis, where the lover boy says, oh, I owe this person all this money, and if I don't pay it, they're going to kill me. So how can we come up with money fast? Well, prostitution. Or a different tactic would be, oh, I love you so much and I want to marry you and have a house with you and kids, but we need money to do that. Well, how are we going to get the money? Well, prostitution, and we're going to work towards a future together. And if at some point the girl stops cooperating, because oftentimes at the beginning, they'll go along with it, even though they're not really sure about it or whatever, but they think, well, it's just going to be for a little while. But of course, it's not just a little while. And if they stop cooperating, that's when the threats and the violence and the coercion starts. And he may have secretly filmed her, having sex with Johns, or threatened to put them on the internet or show her family. He may threaten to hurt her or her family. And he may actually become violent, and then apologize later and say it will never happen again. But of course it does. So he may even be able to convince her this is all her fault that this is happening. So it is sometimes a very similar dynamic that you see in, cases of domestic abuse and things like that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So that's basically the Loverboy method in a nutshell.
Sure. Now, just a question. I know the majority is with girls, but have you ever seen cases or heard of where boys are being groomed by men in homosexual relationships, or rent boys, or boys that are then become gay for pay, that kind of thing, whether they're heterosexual or homosexual? I've ever seen or heard of this happen?
So that's a very good question. And we have heard sort of anecdotal information about this. To my knowledge, it's not happening on a large degree, on a large scale, using this method. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely men and boys being exploited in prostitution. Yeah. But it's usually not happening in exactly this way. Yeah. Also, men and boys are sometimes used by traffickers in sort of a supporting role. So they can also get roped into this as, drug mules or middlemen that will be sent to find girls, or, all kinds of things. So they can also be exploited in other ways.
Yeah, great. So can you briefly describe your curriculum?
Yes, I would love to. So as Catherine mentioned at the beginning, we developed a curriculum on trafficking prevention for German schools in order to reach German youth. And we either do this in same-sex or mixed-sex groups, and there are advantages and disadvantages to both of those setups. But the program is called Liebe, ohne Zwang, which means love without coercion, I guess, translating directly. But what's really important, and I want to preface going into detail by saying what's, I think, really important about our curriculum, and should be important with any type of prevention measure, is that the program needs to aim to measurably change behaviors and attitudes that make someone vulnerable in the first place, instead of just delivering information on a certain topic. So, giving a presentation on trafficking and the Loverboy method to a bunch of teenagers, that's not prevention, it's information. So until you can bring the target group to sort of connect the dots for themselves and recognize how they could be vulnerable, and then how to change that, you haven't actually done prevention. So I think that's just really important to mention for any sort of prevention measures that people may be considering. Now, in our program, we use a story of how a girl meets a lover boy and is then manipulated into prostitution as the foundation of the program. And then at set intervals during the story, we stop and we do exercises and games and have discussion groups with the teens to sort of measure their knowledge of certain topics, and also to identify the vulnerabilities that they can then work on. And what makes you vulnerable to a trafficker? I mean, not having a good support system, not knowing how to recognize if you're in an unhealthy relationship, if you don't have personal boundaries, lack of self-esteem, or knowing that you're worth something, so a lack of knowledge of your self-worth. If you're allowing yourself to be influenced by harmful media and porn even, that really influences your sexuality and how you see yourself. Also engaging in certain risky behaviors that could also make you vulnerable to trafficking, and also engaging in risky behaviors online. I mean, that's becoming even more important. So these are the behaviors and attitudes that we address with our program and are trying to change in the curriculum, in addition to providing information on trafficking and the Loverboy method. So we need to do both, and we need to also measure it. That's important as well. So we've found that surveys, either written or oral, we use both, are really helpful for that. And we usually do our curriculum as part of a whole sort of project day at a school, or a project week. We've done that as well. But the lessons can be presented over longer periods of time. So the program feasibly could, I mean, it's very flexible. So you could do 2 hours every Monday for, 5 or 6 weeks. So, yeah.
So this is pretty in-depth, and it requires a commitment of time
Definitely.
by the school. And so how do you get into schools? I mean, how do you even get the schools to say, oh yeah, we're going to talk about Loverboys and sex trafficking and all these things. But, oh, by the way, this is going to take not an insignificant amount of time.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's not just information where you go in, give a talk, and then come out. I mean, it sounds like a bit of a commitment. So how does, what's your in? And I know this is German context, but I think there's lessons for everyone here.
Yeah. So again, great question. It was very difficult for us at first to get into the schools. We often would get the reaction from them, well, we don't have time for that. We don't have that problem at our school. This is not relevant to our daily school life. And but the schools were unaware of how relevant it actually was, because in sort of the most populous regions of Germany, like in Berlin and the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, where we had done a lot of workshops, we would do surveys at the end and ask the kids, do you think someone who is a victim of a lover boy? And in almost every class, there was at least one person who said yes. So they didn't know what they didn't know, I guess, the schools. Sometimes we were able to get our foot in the door by saying, well, our program is also about forming healthy relationships, about healthy sexuality, about raising self-esteem and being safe online. And sometimes that was enough to get us in, because of course, all young adults need to, learn about that or think about that. But I would say that, yeah. So, but once we were there, this was interesting. Once we were there and they actually saw the program in action, even if we were only allowed to do a 2-hour version or so. And I think that's a good tip too, is to prepare different lengths that you can do, so that you can basically use any time that you're given. But anyway, the schools were always really impressed and invited us back to talk to the other classes, or, booked us to come every year and talk to all of the 8th grade classes. So, but our big breakthrough, I would say, was when we started getting media coverage. So there were some high profile Loverboy trafficking cases in Berlin, or not just in Berlin, but in Germany in general. And there was a film made for TV about the Loverboy method, and then an investigative report afterward. And in this report, a journalist sort of featured our prevention program as sort of well, what can we do about this problem? And there have been a couple reports on the program since. And I would say that was the most effective at getting schools to accept us. So I would encourage anyone, trying to get into schools to do prevention, to reach out to media, invite them to a workshop. I mean, obviously you have to be careful with the students' privacy and things like that, but it can be a good way to educate the public about the program and showcase your program, and that you guys are part of the solution. So that was what really did it for us, the media.
Super. And what about other types of school age activities, after school programs, centers of worship, other youth-oriented programs?
Right. Yeah. Well, we mostly go into schools because pretty much all kids in Germany go to school. So it's a good place to reach them. However, people do use our programs in group homes, in youth groups, at churches, at summer camps. So it's definitely, you can definitely use it there as well. And we've developed a handbook of materials so that basically anyone can use these materials after completing a training with us. And so we've trained multipliers all over the country to implement the curriculum. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier when talking about the curriculum is that sort of the age group that we target, we try to do between the ages of 13 and 19. So basically junior high all the way up through high school or vocational schools. And we also provide a variety of exercises in the handbook for various age groups. Yeah, because the kids are changing a lot between 13 and 19. So the activities you're doing or the discussions you're having, they need to be adaptable and you need to be able to change accordingly. Yeah.
Sure. And just to make a point, which I think you already made, is that you're talking to not just the girls about how to protect themselves, but also boys about how to treat girls and how to treat females and what is healthy sexual relationship, not just from the girl's perspective, but also from the boy's perspective too, which I think is a very important point.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why I would encourage, people to do this type of prevention in mixed sex groups. It's also good to split them up for a little while because, they feel comfortable then talking about different things. But I mean, we're currently adding a new module to the program that's just for boys, because we need to keep in mind that, boys are a great asset in this topic, right? Like they can reach girls in their lives, help educate them, but they can also be targeted by traffickers, as we talked about earlier. Or they themselves maybe could be, if they have contact with a lover boy, might think, oh, well, maybe that's a viable career option for me. They could be a John someday, and they need to be very aware of the prevalence of forced prostitution, especially in Germany, and underage victims of trafficking. So so I'm excited about that expansion of the program and absolutely essential to get boys involved. Yeah.
So, but apart from, actually getting into schools and other programs, have you received any pushback or some strong resistance to this program?
Well, interestingly enough, I would say the biggest pushback that we have received has been from churches or from places of worship, which I was surprised about. So it was also a sort of a similar reaction to the schools, like, oh, we don't have that problem here. We don't need to, educate our youth on that. But yeah, even talking about, offering the other topics hasn't seemed to make much headway. So that's an area where I think a lot of progress could be made, is getting into those communities, because our organization personally has seen several cases where, girls from religious families appear to be targeted even because they are generally seen as more naive, especially when it comes to topics of sexuality. And so I think it's a mistake to ignore that population. It's also a mistake for churches to think that, well, this isn't going to happen to our youth, so.
Right. That's very, very good point. So how can parents be more involved in this issue? What could you offer to families in terms of prevention, or perhaps some advocacy for getting this into their church or place of worship?
Yeah. So parents are also, a great asset for us. We offer even a parents' evening that we can do. It's also a part of our curriculum. So I think it's always very important to get them involved. Also, the education and the learning is going to be continuing at home. So it's always important to get them on board. We have materials for parents that they can use also to take to their schools or to their churches or their, youth centers, whatever. And really, advocate that, our kids need to hear about these types of things. So if parents are interested in that, we have materials for them. And I know it's a scary topic for parents. And a lot of times they don't quite know how to approach it with their children, and so, but running away from it isn't going to help. I mean, it's something that we really need to face head on. And and talking to parents, whose daughters have been affected by this, it's just, it's heartbreaking, and they don't know how to react a lot of times. And so, we, on our website, if people are interested, we do have a list sort of do's and don'ts. If you know someone who this is happening to and you're not quite sure how to react, because they are in a very delicate position and situation, and it's sort of finding the balance between letting them know that you're always there for them and love them no matter what, but not being too hard on them and saying it's my way or the highway and this is what's happening to you, and if you can't see that, well, then get out. You don't want to ever do anything like that. It should always be open, welcoming. You might not understand what she's going through, or you might not be able to understand why she's choosing to do this, but you're always going to leave her the choice of to come to you or not, and what to do about it, because that's what's going to set you apart from the lover boy, because he forces and makes her do things, and you want to be open and you want to give her the choice, because if she doesn't choose to leave him, then she's probably just going to keep going back. I mean,
Yeah.
the rates of that are very high.
Yeah. And you
So,
can
yeah.
always be there faithfully waiting,
Yep.
being strong, extending invitation after invitation, not going away, but not leaving her alone, but also not forcing. That's an excellent
Exactly.
point. Yep.
Yep. And it may also be, in some cases, if a daughter is affected, it may be best not to say, hey, there's this Loverboy method. Do you know about it? You know, this is what happens, and this is exactly what your boyfriend is doing, but rather, you know, say, oh, you know, I heard about this, and have you heard about this? And don't you think this is something you should tell your friends about? Or I found this flyer, and just leave it there for her to read. Or there's this movie. Do we want to watch this movie together?
Yeah.
Sometimes that works better.
Sure.
Yeah, because she doesn't feel threatened then.
That's right. That's right. Okay, final question. For those of us not in Germany, don't speak German, do you have any programs or curricula you can recommend in English, websites even? What do you know about what's up there?
What do I know?
Which is a lot, I'm sure. Yeah.
We would love to get our program translated into English at some point. So hopefully we'll have funds for that in the future, but we don't have that right now. So I can recommend a US-based curriculum. It's called Best Life Curriculum. It seems very similar to our program. So it's also very much concerned with, you know, changing attitudes and behaviors and that kind of stuff. So I can recommend that. I would say that whenever you're taking if you're going to be using any type of curriculum or program from another country, that you need to be aware of cultural differences. So you probably aren't going to be able to transfer, you know, one-to-one the program. So in the case of the US, for example, we were talking about how runaways are most often targeted or in group homes and almost exclusively as these types of trafficking victims. So that's going to be different from in Germany. Or maybe some of the, you know, exercises that they're doing with the teens, you know, you're like, well, that's not going to fly in Romania or wherever I am. So just be cognizant of that.
Sure, sure. That's great.
And I do know the Best Life curriculum is, it's a little bit pricey to get trained in it. But again, I mean, if you're looking for a good English curriculum, I think it's a good one. Yeah.
Great. So anything else I neglected to ask you about, or anything you want to add for our guests? Or
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the questions. There is something I want to talk about in that section, but
well, we'll get to it. And it's
a bit more private.
Yeah, well, that's why you should join live. For those of you on the YouTube, join live and you get to the really good stuff. So I'll stop the recording here and we'll join you for questions. Thanks.